with us today. And we do have quite a few people attending today's session, so we're very excited about that. So for those of you who are new, we welcome you to your first coffee shop webinar with our .org Solutions team. My name is Amy Wong, and I'm president and founder of .org Solutions. We are a marketing, PR, and fundraising firm that specifically works with nonprofits and located here in Akron, Ohio. If you could please do me a favor, in the first couple minutes, we're just going to do some housekeeping items. If you can just do a quick wave or a quick hello, let us know that you can hear us. That would be great. All right, we're getting lots of hand raises, so you can hear us and see us. That's great. So as people are getting settled in, I'm going to just take just a couple seconds here to talk about our .org Cafe professional development opportunities and our coffee shop webinars. Our coffee shop webinars started in June of last year, initially started as a response to just what we thought was a lack of opportunities for professional development for the nonprofit sector during the initial stages of the pandemic. And as we started to just get some really good feedback from people who attended our webinars, we've decided to continue on with those. And throughout the year, we'll be having sessions monthly. And we'll be taking a little time off during the summer, but we will just have a variety of topics that we'll touch on that we think good, relevant pieces of information for nonprofit professionals. Also, as part of our Cafe Professional Development Series, we do have a monthly newsletter, weekly blog that go out, and just really active social media presence on both LinkedIn and Facebook. So if you're just looking for a lot of things nonprofit, a lot of good resources, please follow us, like us, and sign up for those particular things. It's not just all .org content. We curate a lot of content from throughout the nonprofit industry. So we tap into a variety of sources for you. So really the whole premise by our coffee shop webinars is that we're just really trying to put out a lot of information that's relatable. So as you'll see with our formats for most of our webinars, they're conversations that we're having with other experts in the field, generally a panelist and a moderator. Everyone else as part of the session will be muted and off video. So typically we run these as a question and answer format. And we do appreciate those of you who submitted your questions ahead of time. So we'll do our best to address those questions during the session. We will have both the Q&A function and the chat box enabled. So please make sure that if you have a question, ask it in the beginning of or during the session. We will also be able to answer those during the session. So I think that's pretty much what we have. We will also leave about 5 to 10 minutes at the end of our session so that if you do have any follow-up questions, we will make sure that we answer those. So again, thank you for being with us today. So as I mentioned, we're going to be talking today about aligning marketing and fundraising plans for maximum impact. And as those of you who are in these fields know, they really do serve two distinct purposes, but they're really very intertwined. So the success of one is often dependent upon the success of the other. And when a nonprofit lacks alignment in its fundraising and marketing messages and plans, it can be really costly. So it's really important to have that alignment so that each functions as the way it should, but engages the target audiences in a way that's effective through various communication channels. And so that's really where we're going to be focusing our time today, is talking about a lot of different things around marketing communication and how they need to work with fundraising. We'd like to welcome Tracy Burt. Welcome, Tracy. We're glad you're with us today. She is our panelist. Tracy is Vice President of Marketing Communications for Akron Community Foundation. And as leader of ACF's Marketing Communications Department, her role is to provide strategic direction for the Foundation's marketing initiatives and management of the organization's brand. And as we'll talk about, ACF has she'll have a dual role because they're a grant-making organization as well as a fundraising organization. And so that was really a big part of the reason we wanted to have her today, because she actually wears both hats. Prior to her work at the foundation, Tracy was an account director at Akron Communications, where she developed and executed integrated marketing plans for both B2B and consumer clients. She has a bachelor's degree in public relations from Kent State. So again, Tracy, welcome. We're glad to have you today.
Thanks for having me.
So I think we're just going to jump right into this. And, you know, we use the term aligning marketing and fundraising plans. I think it's great to just start from the beginning and say, like, what are some of the first things you need to consider when aligning those two plans?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not even just about necessarily fundraising and marketing. I think it kind of goes back to the basics. And, you know, one of the fundamental things that I think we as marketers have to think about is our audience. And sometimes that tends to get glossed over or forgotten. So, you know, really when it comes down to it, any marketing plan should start there, because understanding your audience helps you guide every part of your plan, from the topics you write about to the mediums you use to disseminate the information. So, you know, take Akron Community, for example. As you mentioned, we are a grant maker. And so we are putting money back out into the community, into nonprofits here locally. But to do that, we have to fundraise. So obviously that's a big part of my job as a marketer. So, you know, one of the primary audiences that we work with is high net worth individuals, is what we refer to them as. So these are people who have, you know, the means to establish a fund with us that starts at around $5,000. So we know this tends to be a slightly older audience. They're typically people who've, you know, built some wealth during their careers. You know, many of them are tech savvy, but we're also dealing with, as I mentioned, a kind of older audience. So we have to make sure, you know, we're keeping traditional print publications in there. But we're also working with audiences like professional advisors that we refer to them. They're, you know, accountants and financial managers and lawyers. And so, you know, while there's probably even some crossover with those two audiences, the way we communicate with them is a little different, because we're communicating with, you know, advisors on work hours, and we have emails for all of them. So we think of them very differently, and how we communicate with them differently, so that we're reaching them, you know, when, how, where they like to be reached. So, you know, we have a variety of audiences, but that's just kind of an example of how we really think through our audience first before figuring out, you know, where we're communicating with them or how we're communicating with them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I know, you know, we talk about this a lot here at .org about, you know, knowing your audiences is really critical to any communication. But I think sometimes it's really hard, because you get people who say, well, everybody's our audience. You know, we serve anybody could be our donor. And so sometimes it's hard to kind of find that, you know, that direction. And so persona development, this is like kind of a great exercise, right, that people can use to figure out who those audiences are. So let's talk about persona development a little bit.
Yeah, you know, it's funny, we actually did it probably most recently and extensively through, we launched a website last May. And so when we were in the planning process of that, we did kind of an extensive persona development. And we took, you know, as I mentioned, that high net worth individual, and made like 3 different personas for them. So we'll take, you know, James, for example. James is a 70 plus male who still likes to read the paper in the morning and likes to go golfing, and, you know, doesn't really use Facebook in his opinion, but still, you know, gets on his wife's profile and searches that way. Or, you know, it sounds kind of fun, you know, and kind of silly, but we developed a bunch of those different personas to really get a good idea of what our audience looks like, where they're getting their news and their media information from. And, you know, we did it, some of it's common sense. You know your audience, you've worked with them long enough that you kind of have an idea of where, you know, where they're getting their news, or which local outlets they like to go to. But, you know, a lot of it's research driven too. You can see what Facebook analytics are. And so we know that our users are more likely to be on Facebook than TikTok. So we're probably not going to have, you know, TikTok for us. It may work for others, that, you know, and that's the whole point, is figuring out the audiences or the outlets that work for your audience specifically. And so it's using a variety of tools to kind of figure out who that person is, and actually put some like hobbies and technology to them to explain them a little better.
We did the same thing here at .org, and we actually had a really good time with it, because we gave everybody fun names. So we have like Fran the fundraiser, and Maggie the marketer, and I think Pat, the professional advisor. So, so I think that, it is nice to have fun with it, because then you actually are thinking about your personas when you're thinking about where something goes to. So, maybe I know that like when you are looking at personas, like some of the things that we look at are, how does somebody receive information? So do they receive it via Facebook, a newspaper? Do they receive it via email, or what kind of things resonate with them? But also, how do they communicate? Do they still use a phone? Do they prefer print materials? Like what kind of things do they like to do in terms of their communication? Because you can have somebody who's 80 and extremely tech savvy,
Oh, yeah,
and
exactly.
somebody who's 40 who's not.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I mean, I think that you're right, that the persona development really helps with that, because, for a professional advisor audience that I was talking about, we're probably gonna, mostly digital, but like I said, for that high net worth audience, we may have to employ a variety of tactics to make sure that we're hitting them multiple times, so that they're seeing the message, consistently and multiple times, because it does take people, a couple of times seeing your message usually before acting. So yeah, certainly it really does help with figuring out where to put your time, if that makes
Absolutely.
sense.
And actually, if anybody is looking for a free persona development tool, it actually will even help you get little caricatures. HubSpot, HUBSPOT.com. If you do a search for their persona development tool, it's really kind of fun. It can help you develop those personas.
Oh, that's fun. Now I want to do it again, just because that sounds like fun.
Yeah, it is. It's really fun. I know we kind of geeked out on it ourselves. So the third step after you've identified your audiences and developed your personas, it's to actually kind of develop your plans and stick to them, right? So kind of accountability and deadlines. So let's talk about that a little bit. How do you align those plans?
Well, first, I think also aligning your plans with your organization's strategic plan is really important. Right now we're in the midst of a strategic plan. And so while I obviously have some ongoing, communications tools, the strategic plan is driving a lot of the content that is in those, even standard tools. Like we have a biannual magazine. So we're going to put that out regardless of what's going on, but the strategic plan is helping drive a lot of that messaging. So I think first is either aligning it with your strategic plan or with your annual goals if your organization doesn't have a strategic plan. But then, yes, I think what you were saying is totally key, that you have to, at least in my experience, most marketers and people with PR, journalism, those type of backgrounds, we're all pretty deadline driven. And if we were just talking about it, actually, if you don't have a deadline, sometimes things just linger. So we look at even a year out, looking at a year out for planning, and put together, it sounds old school, but we use an Excel spreadsheet in my department that we all share, so that we all know what's coming down the pike and who's responsible. I think we talked about that as well. That is most key, I think, too, is assigning responsibility, because if you don't, even if you have a deadline, no one's going to move that project forward. So those are, I think, the two keys, is just having, I don't care how you track it. Like I said, we're old school. We do an Excel spreadsheet, but I know you use probably project management software. So however it is that you can track it and look short-term as well as long-term, I think is key. And then sticking to that as much as you can.
We always say that if no one has if more than one person has ultimate responsibility for a task or a project, nobody has it.
It's so true.
Because it's very hard for anybody to have that ownership. And so somebody will always say, well, so-and-so's doing, or so-and-so's doing it. So having that accountability.
Absolutely.
All right. So one of the other things you and I talked about when we were preparing for this call was the importance of like understanding who's benefiting. And you said this was like a key column that you have on your spreadsheet. So in addition to knowing like what the task is, what the deadline is, and who's actually ultimately accountable for finishing that task, you also have a who is benefiting column. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so as we talked about, I mean, this calls specifically to talk about fundraising and marketing, but in marketing, you work with kind of every aspect of your organization. So we have a finance department that sometimes I'm working with them on, as simple as posting the 990 on our website, or our grant making department to talk about the most recent round of grants that our board approved. So in addition, on my tracking sheet, I have kind of a tab where I put whether it's a tactic for my department, for development, for or fundraising, or for grant making, so that I can track too, okay, how much of my time is spent on fundraising versus grant making versus just marketing tactics that my department is responsible for. So that just kind of helps me keep track of where we're spending the most of our time.
And does that help you allocate your time better, not just understand it, but allocate it better?
Yeah, I think it does both, because I'll be honest, most of my time is spent working with our fundraising department, our development department. But I have to make sure that we're adequately, if we're raising money but not telling people how we're getting it back out into the community, what's going to drive people to want to donate? Nothing. So I have to make sure that we are plotting out, through the year, when do we have, good touch points for grant making information, as well as, the fundraising kind of being kind of our primary marketing goal, if you will.
So, ACF has kind of the benefit of having probably a team of people who's working on marketing and then fundraisers at the same time. One of the questions that we did get prior to the session was really in relationship to the small shop. And I think it's really important to talk about this, because a lot of our attendees of these webinars are from, small nonprofits, or they're from a small shop. How can a small shop with like just one full-time fundraising staff member, maybe one part-time or full-time marketing staff member, maximize the limited amount of time that they have, not just day to day, but the time that they may even have just working together?
Yeah, I think there are two parts to that question. So I think, first and foremost, I think no matter how big your department are, how good your resources are in marketing, there's always more you can be doing. There are always new outlets and new ideas, and it may very well fit with the audience and the purpose that we were talking about. So there are maybe 5 tactics you could be doing, but if you only have time for one, pick the one. I would rather people do something really well than to try and do everything that's thrown at you. So, I mean, unfortunately, and it's easier said than done sometimes, that means saying no or not right now to great ideas, because just because it's a great idea doesn't mean that you'll be able to do it well in, the time or with the money that you have to spend. So that's, I think, kind of the first part of that question. But then also, I think what really helps, again, regardless of size, is making sure that, for us, it's making sure our marketing department and our development department are in lockstep. So our vice president of development and I, we meet twice a month at least individually. We meet, with senior staff and in kind of staff meetings and department meetings, but the two of us meet to just kind of talk through what we have going on, to make sure that, I know what she's working on and what I'm working on, so that we're not duplicating efforts, or that we're not, she's maybe sending out an email on Wednesday to our fund holders, and I was planning on sending, event invite. Well, might want to reconsider that, so that we're not kind of inundating people. So I think just making sure that you have an alignment with the other departments, so that what's going, even if you're not writing or editing their work that's going out, that that it's happening, so you can make sure that you guys are working together and accomplishing more that way.
Well, we focus a lot as, fundraisers and marketers on the external communication, and sometimes we forget about how important it is to be communicating internally. And, to your point of having a regularly scheduled meeting with your counterpart on the fundraising side, I think those regular meetings are very important. And I know people are like, I need more meetings.
I know.
No, ever. But I'm the feeling like, if you have a really standard agenda, and even if it's 30 minutes twice a month, where you have a very targeted way of going about it, it is going to save you from having to backpedal and having your donors get 2 pieces of communication within an hour.
Right, for sure. Yeah, I agree. And I know that probably does make people cringe to say more meetings, but if they're productive meetings and they're, that's what you need more of.
I know. Well, hopefully soon we're all going to be able to be in person and have in-person meetings again on a more regular basis. So let's hope for that.
Yeah.
So, what are, so let's say you just have a limited staff, like what are the things that, what are some of the most important things that you should focus on? And I know you've already referred to the fact that, you can't do everything because you're one person or you may have a small team, but in doing things that you do well, what are some things that you really should be focusing on?
Again, I think, as far as talking about audience, I think there's also content. So once you know who you're talking to and maybe which vehicles, make the most sense, focus your time on your content and then repurpose it in multiple formats so that you're not, writing an e-newsletter that's totally different from a story that's on your website. Like concentrate your time into writing really good content and then breaking it up for a bunch of different platforms. So, I think, as far as marketers go, yes, you probably should have, a presence on social media. I'm not going to tell you what media that is because again, it depends on your audience. For us, when we were looking at, I think I told you about this, Amy, that we were looking at, 4 different social media platforms. And for us and for our high net worth audience, Facebook made more sense. We do have an Instagram channel as that's kind of grown and the audience for that has kind of grown. But like I said, we're probably not going to be on TikTok. So I'm going to prioritize my time on, the social media platforms that matter. So I think, yes, social media, you should have a good solid web presence and PR campaign. But from there, it's really just, again, it ties back to audience and where they're getting their information so that you can really just pick those kind of key places that you need to be consistently and consistency. That's a big key too, is if you're trying to kind of communicate on the newest tool all the time, you're not going to reach people because you're just kind of bouncing all over the place. So consistent. I'd rather see you do a quarterly e-newsletter than, a random one-off email here that people maybe aren't expecting. So have some consistency with your plans as well.
One thing that you mentioned, and I think people don't realize this, is that especially now with people having very short attention spans, with things like social media not showing up in people's feeds because, at the same rate, people reading emails at different times, you may get one thing and not the other. There's the whole concept of repurposing content.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that a lot of nonprofits feel as though everything has to be absolutely new, and that's not really the case. Can you talk a little bit more about the importance of repurposing content?
Oh, sure. So I'll give an example. So, we focus on audience development and we have, newsletters that go to our nonprofit audience and newsletters that go to our professional advisor audience only. And then we have kind of our general newsletter that goes out to, the broadest audience that may be donors and nonprofits and advisors and community leaders. Most of that information is in one or the other, in one of the other outlets. So yeah, some people may get a component of that information twice, but who's to say they read it the first time? You don't want to necessarily just keep hitting people over the head with the exact same email per se, but including an article about planned giving in a newsletter to professional advisors may make sense to be in just our general quarterly e-newsletter. So we're always trying to make sure that we, use the content we have wisely so that it's not so much, it's too daunting if you feel like you have to write, something new for every single type of communication you're putting out. That's just not the case.
And if you do have if an organization has a blog, or if an organization has other stories that they've run 3-6 months ago, you can run them again.
Yeah.
Because 9 times out of 10, people aren't going to remember it. And I always say that, tell me 3 of the stories that you saw on Facebook earlier today. And likely you're not going to be able to name 3 things that you saw on Facebook earlier today. So your audiences are that way too. So repurposing content is just a great way to have a lot of maximum efficiency.
Absolutely. Especially with social media. I mean, social media itself just could be completely overwhelming, if you feel like you're having to constantly like mine it for information to share or new stuff. I mean, just use what you have. That's really, content marketing is really where it's at to make sure that you're maximizing your time.
Absolutely. So, kind of going on with this and knowing, limited resources, and even you at ACF don't have a team of, 20 people doing your marketing for you. How do you create a schedule that provides the structure you need while allowing for the potential for people that hijack your day? And I think this resonates with anybody who does marketing or fundraising, that you go into your day with a plan, with a schedule, and in the first 30 minutes, it's kind of blown out of the water. So what are some ways that you would recommend creating a schedule that would help?
Jokingly, yeah, I wish I knew how to not have people hijack your day. Because I think I'm the worst person to ask that, because I feel like that happens all the time. But, for me, it's not, I mean, I do try and set somewhat of a daily schedule. Like I think we had talked about, I try not to have more than I have to meetings before 10 a.m. so that I can get through some emails and read the news and know what's going on locally as well as, across the world. But so that and then time to kind of plan for what I'm going to do that day, whether it is 4 meetings and my day is hijacked, or whether it is actually feeling like I get to accomplish something. But for me, I think even more so than worrying about my day or my week, we at the foundation look very long term. So I think I had mentioned it earlier that like we're planning out a year in advance. We know kind of the ongoing jobs that we always do, and we have those plotted out so that they're not kind of coming up and all of a sudden like, oh shoot, we have another board meeting and we have to get a press release ready to go out afterwards. That is in our schedule all the time. It's prepared well in advance, as well as knowing, what those strategic plan objectives are and kind of how those are going to, work in with the marketing plan. So if we plan out projects far enough, I don't have to worry so much about a day getting lost. I mean, yes, there are always deadlines that are, impending deadlines and things that, come up quickly that you have to accomplish. But if I have a long-term plan for projects, they're more likely to get accomplished than, let me give a for instance. So our website, we decided very specifically to take more than a year to launch our website. And I know that probably sounds like, oh my gosh, that's exhausting. But it was intentional, because then we didn't have to, for 4 months, ignore everything else to get a website launched that's a pretty, extensive website. It was something that we could work on in pockets of time when we knew we had, good solid time available. And so I think I had mentioned to you that, I've been at the foundation long enough now that I have an idea of how our schedule ebbs and flows, and that I know that, our development department is crazy in December, but my schedule is actually a little lighter. And so we wrote all of the web content in December for the site that launched in May, that we had a lot of it kind of knocked out when I knew I wouldn't be getting, random projects that were coming up from our fundraising department. So I think kind of that long-term approach really helps me not worry so much about my day getting hijacked, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, well, I think also too is you talk about how, December is easier for you, but the fundraising team is really busy in December as well, or they're busy, you're not as busy. I think it's really important to understand the ebbs and flows, not just of your fundraising counterpart, but maybe with other groups within your organization, or maybe it's even your own structure. So if you have an event and that the event date is a Saturday after, and your newsletter was supposed to go out on the Monday after that, well, how can you plan that accordingly so that, they're not all in the same space and all jammed up just because you said that was going to be that way? What can you plan ahead? What can you pass off? Or understanding, like, if you need communication things for an annual report, well, how do you put that into the time where your accounting team or your finance team is not going to be worried about getting out 1099s and processing year-end gifts and doing all those other kinds of things? So
yeah, absolutely.
So, you also talked about like not planning big projects during busy seasons. So, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so let's take, for instance, our one of our biannual magazine issues comes out in November. Typically, it comes out around Thanksgiving, so that means it has to go to the mail house in early November. That's, I think, a key too, is kind of working back from your deadline, so that it's not just, okay, you've set a deadline, that's great, but what key, other internal deadlines for that big project you have to meet. So I know that 3 weeks in advance, I probably want to get that final document sent to the printer. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent a little.
That's okay.
But I'll get back to it. And then if I need to have that 3 weeks in advance of the mail date, then how early do I have to have content? So, it takes us 3 months to get a big magazine out every twice a year. But alternatively, so if October and November, I'm spending a lot of time on my magazine and I know that's coming, we have to start looking at our year-end planning, earlier than that, so that we're not trying to write although, again, with hijacking, sometimes you can't help that. You're going to have big projects overlap, but to the best of your ability, if you can plan to have your year-end communications done so that you can focus on your magazine, whatever that project may be, you're just setting yourself up to make sure that, you're focusing quality time on important projects, when you have the time to do so, instead of cramming a bunch of things into the month of October or November for a December, deadline.
Well, and that kind of takes your website project of giving it that year of space, even taking it to, I would say, even a more granular level, is actually giving yourself space and blocks of time to work on things. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that it is hard in fundraising and marketing, but is essential. So that kind of goes back to, creating a schedule of saying, okay, where can I put blocks of time into my schedule that are times where I can actually have some time to think, time to write, time to plan, time to schedule, so that you're not running up against deadlines that are colliding.
Yeah, schedule meetings with yourself so that people can't book you and hijack your day.
Yep. Yes. Well, and that goes back to, what you said earlier of, sometimes you just have to say no.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Or not right now is what, fundraisers hear that as, right? Is like, not right now. So, another thing we talked about too is like, what are your resources and capacity? So talk a little bit about that and knowing what you need to know about yourself.
You mean my personal resources?
Well, I just think people in general. So, we talked about knowing what you're capable of and what's your time and what are the resources available to you before you take on things.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think that's very key. And I mean, that way you're playing to your strengths. So I know if we have, money for a certain project, maybe I need to outsource some of that. If my internal resources are more focused on, writing and project management, and we don't have as much design capability at the time, and if I can, I'm going to outsource that. So for me personally, I think, allocating resources, that's kind of how I see it, of, kind of juggling things to fit, where my internal people are best, what's the word I'm looking for, best allocated for those jobs, so that I can make sure that we're spending our time, instead of, maybe working on design that would take us a lot longer to come up with something that looks pretty good. If I can, work with someone else to get that, looking excellent, why would I not do that? So I think I try, and it's that same kind of like high level picture, like look at overall the resources we have and how we can kind of fill them into each of those accountability spots, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. So, this next topic comes up. It's like, we've talked about the importance of planning. We talked about the importance of, where do you allocate your time with the amount of resources that you have. the next thing that always comes up is like, well, how do I know, even though I have my personas, how do I know what to use and when? So I want to talk a little bit about choosing platforms, and social media seems to be the one where there's a lot of confusion because, we all have heard the board member that says, you need to be on TikTok, and you have nobody that moves or has any talent, right, in your organization, maybe, just kidding. Or you need to be on Instagram, but you don't have anything that might be visually appealing to be on Instagram. So talk a little bit about like social media and maybe some ways that you can, if you're struggling with what your board or your leadership is trying to tell you to do and you have limited time, what are some best practices on how to pick where you need to be?
I mean, social media, I feel like is so well written about that you can usually find some good resources to back up your, marketers, we probably understand at a fundamental level kind of who is using what platforms and when it makes sense for your audience. So like you said, TikTok for us is probably never going to happen. I just don't see that being, the outlet that works for us. But for a theater group, it may be a very good, outlet for them. So I think being able to, speak to the audience, it all ties back to that audience. So if you can say that, Facebook is one, it's one of it's I think the biggest social media platform, in the world. And it's also more popular with it tends to have an older audience than say Instagram and TikTok. That's where I'm going to spend my time. So it's all based on research and that audience fit. Again, I mean, I think that's really what it comes back to for anything. So, if it's whether you're talking about social media or email or print, it just matters with how that audience wants to receive your communication and doing that so that you're not spreading yourself. So then we could probably find a reason to have a TikTok account if we really wanted to, but it just doesn't make sense for our audience. So why would I waste our resources doing that?
And I think that's the way we look at it too. We had a Twitter account for the longest time, but people aren't looking for what we have, what we do on Twitter, but we actually work a lot in, the professional services and those kinds. So LinkedIn makes a lot of sense for us because we're not with consumers. So, does it fit with your personas is always a great question to ask yourself. And then I think, even taking that a step further and say, what is your capacity? Right. So, I mean, there might be two platforms that are really great, but if you only have the capacity to manage one, going back to your point, Tracy, pick things that you can do and do them really, really well, instead of trying to have a lot of volume. And again, those will tie into your plans as well.
Well, and I mean, that gives me a specific example for us of, when we were looking at social media, it takes a lot of time, even if you are, curating content holistically and then breaking it up for use. But, we had been thinking I'm not going to lie, it had been years that we were talking about really kind of starting to put more effort into our LinkedIn channel. We knew that it was a good fit for the professional advisor audience, that, it's much more of a professional business focused platform, and it made sense there, but we did not have the time to devote to it and do it well. And it would just stagnate if we had launched it a couple of years ago. But this year we were finally able to launch a professional advisor quarterly e-newsletter that gave us content that we could easily then just schedule out into LinkedIn over a month or two. And so we've just started slowly incorporating that into our marketing plans because we finally had the content and capacity to do so. But it was a good idea. It probably I'm sure to some people should have been done a long time ago, but we could not do it well and consistently. So I'd prefer to not do something than to do it half-heartedly.
Well, and I think it's probably the same for you holds true with Facebook as well, because you can have two different audiences, your nonprofits and then also your donors, right? So like a lot of the nonprofits who might be on this session today, they have the people who are going to donate to them, but also the people who might be looking to their organization for, for service utilization or however, they're going to be interacting with them. So, again, going back to having a solid plan, having a structure, and understanding how things fit together are a good thing. So,
Yep,
so it looks like we do have a question, and I think we can go ahead and, you know what, I'm going to wait a minute to answer that because I think it'll be relevant after this particular rest of this. So let's talk a little bit about email platforms and website and some key things that you need to have in those two particular formats.
Yeah, I think, you know, on your email and website, and specifically for, I think, nonprofits that have kind of those two very different audiences of, you know, end user, client, and donors. I think I've seen a lot of times in those kind of mission-driven nonprofits versus us being a grant maker, our website is kind of totally focused on our grant making and our fundraising. And so people can go there, find information about events that we have or how to give, and it's front and center. But I've seen on some nonprofits where, you know, I know they have a sponsorship packet out for an event. And so someone sent it to me in email, but I can't find it. So I go to their website and I can't find it there either. So, you know, donors may not be the primary audience for your website. Your website is probably being used to get information out to your clients, but you still have to think about donors and have some sort of section on your website that's devoted to them so that if they've heard that there's an event happening, there may be an Eventbrite set up with information about that event, but if it's not on your website where they're more likely to go first, driving them back to that registration link, you know, what's the point if they can't find that information on your site? So just when you're developing donor communications, make sure you're thinking about your website and have a donate button really prominent. That goes for email too. I think you'd asked about email newsletters too, that, you know, make sure that donation link is in every email you send out to donors, so that even if it's not necessarily a kind of hard selling type of email, that they have that opportunity to click and go right to your giving page.
So you and I were talking about not being able to find sponsorship information on a website, and we both had the same frustration in the same week.
Yes.
And we're not going to throw any nonprofits under the bus here, but they were two different nonprofits.
Yeah.
Both of us had the role of putting things together for sponsorships, and we could not find the information that we needed to be able to create ads and do some other communication. So I can't reiterate that enough, that you don't know who's going to be on your website looking for information. And it could be, you know, a marketing firm looking for sponsorship information to create an ad for somebody, or the organization itself. So make sure that's easy to find. And it can be as easy as a downloadable PDF.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, it doesn't have to be, you know, some sort of registration type of, you know, software built into your site. It just has to be that it's there. I mean, and that goes back to, again, thinking through those personas. You know, we developed our site for, yes, our primary audience. So for those mission kind of based nonprofits, it's going to be their clients probably as their primary audience. But we also thought through what a professional advisor would see when they came to the site, what a community leader would see when they came to the site, because they need something different than our, you know, fund holders do. They might be coming wanting to find our 990 and information about events. And so we have to make sure that it's easy to find on our website for them.
Absolutely. So before we have a couple questions that are coming in, we're going to try to wrap up a couple more things I want to talk to you about before we wrap up. You know, measurement is something that a lot of people don't consider, right? You know, you're talking about getting the marketing out there and stuff. How do you measure? How are some ways you measure success?
Oh my gosh, isn't that hard to think of sometimes? Because it's like, you just want to keep going and going and doing what you're doing. But if you don't measure, you don't really know for sure if what you're doing is working. So we don't live and die by metrics by any mean, but we do definitely look at our metrics, and we have a quarterly dashboard that we update so that we know, you know, we can track over time how our e-newsletter is doing, and if the open rates and click rates are declining or if they're doing better. You know, what might have driven that. Some of it's anecdotal, some of it's actual, you know, hard data. Is fundraising meeting their goals? You know, that take some credit for that. That ties back to, you know, the marketing efforts that you're doing. So we definitely look at that and use tools to kind of see, you know, how our website's tracking, how our emails are, you know, media monitoring, that sort of thing. So it's definitely important, I think, for people to kind of stop and take stock, because if not, you can't really say for sure whether what you're doing is working. If you can't kind of track over time how those click rates are going in your emails.
And it's good to do that by campaign, You know, so if you can even kind of like put things into a campaign, so this is maybe our general email campaign, or this is our year-end fundraising campaign, and really understanding. There's some good simple tools to be able to do that. Like I know, but and actually this is a good segue. We're going to be talking about some of that in our next webinar series next quarter. So if you're interested in learning more about marketing measurement and stuff, we'll be talking a little bit more about that in the next couple of months. So
Good, I'll join that one.
yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great. So we do have actually a couple questions. So before we get your final thoughts and recommendations, let's go ahead and answer a couple questions. The first question is about like, it's a small nonprofit, and like many in the area, they're funded almost exclusively through sponsorship. And so do you have any recommendations on increasing sponsorship through marketing?
You know what, it's funny, at the foundation, we are, we're a little less focused on event marketing than we are on major giving, but I think kind of, you know, approaching it similarly. And really, I'm speaking a little out of turn, because really when it comes to that sort of thing, it's really on my our development department handles the, you know, sponsorships and major giving. So I'm kind of taking what I've learned from them to give you that. But I think kind of focusing on, you know, really targeting your ask and know what you're asking. Don't ask someone to give $10,000 if last year they were only able to give 1,000. It might just look like you're not even paying attention, and they think, well, okay, well, if I can't give 10,000, I guess I won't give anything. So I think just, you know, again, it's knowing your audience. It's the same kind of thing, knowing your audience and making sure you're targeting your messaging to them. So maybe just blasting out a sponsorship email is not the best approach. You're going to need to call them, reach out individually, and, you know, kind of follow up. And this is what I've seen is like following up and giving that ask personally is where you kind of get the, you know, especially the bigger donations. That's where it comes from. It's hard. I can tell, not that I'm the one that has to do it, but, you know, it's a hard thing to do, but to call and say, hey, you know what? We think you can give us that $25,000 sponsorship. It takes more of a personal touch. Someone's probably not just going to mail in a check for those bigger sponsorship opportunities.
You know, I can speak to this a little bit as a for-profit entity after working in the nonprofit space for a really long time. I think, you know, as a company who we get solicited for sponsorships, you know, fairly often. We're looking at a couple of different things. We're looking at our own philanthropic goals and our goals that are aligning with us as a company. But also we're looking at how can we get the maximum benefit for the investment that we're making. And so, you know, to tag on to what you said about audiences, I think it's really important to understand that, you know, when somebody's sponsoring an event, their motivations typically are advertising as well as their philanthropic intent, and also getting their people into the community and aligning with organizations that are important to them. So make sure that, you know, when you're putting together your sponsorship materials, make sure that you're kind of factoring in value of how you're going to represent that company at different levels, and also think a little bit outside of the box. I mean, you figure so many companies, everybody's like, oh, let's, you know, Goodyear's the biggest company in Akron, let's get Goodyear. Or, you know, Joanne Fabrics is up in Hudson, let's, you know, target them. Or they're going to, First Energy is, you know, really big, we're going to target them. And, you know, there may be other little, smaller companies that may feel really strongly about what you do, or maybe your organization has helped their employees in some particular way, that may prefer to have that, you know, that tie-in. So really it's about thinking through the value as well as potential companies that would align with your sponsorship opportunities. So I hope that answers that question. All right, we have another question. So do we have any advice, or do you have any advice on converting marketing contacts into donors or into active fundraisers for the organization? So this would be people who would come in probably via, maybe they attended an event. So I think for you, this might be, you know, maybe people who had come in from the Women's Endowment Fund dinner that you may convert. So how do you maybe look at converting some of those contacts into active fundraisers or donors?
Yeah, I think, you know, as simple as it sounds, is just making sure that if someone attends, one of our events, that say we have even a community issue session. So when we're in person, we've done these sessions where we'll bring in nonprofits to talk about, if it's during our education grant cycle, they might be talking about early learning initiatives. So if someone attends that session, even if it's someone we've never heard of, they're not in our database, we put them into our main mailing list so that they're at least consistently getting, a couple of our top level communications. So I think having a good kind of content management or contact management process is key, and just making sure that you don't lose them after they attend an event. They need to keep getting your material. So make sure that you're staying in front of them. I think that's first. And then, when we're talking about conversion, I think, converting to donors, we think long term. So just kind of making sure that the information that's getting in front of them is stuff that's going to keep kind of whetting their appetite and having them keep coming back, because it may take, for us, it could take years to convert someone from, a first time event attendee to perhaps being maybe a, $25 donor to eventually starting, a 5,000 or more donor advised fund. So I think, it's just having kind of a long-term and structured approach to starting from making sure you're not losing that donor, to, making sure they're getting your communications for the long term. And I mean, we could go into a lot of specifics of talking about drip campaigns and making sure they're getting kind of, key information right from the get-go. But I think just in general, having a contact management plan is key to make sure that it's not like they attend an event and then they never hear from you again.
Well, and I think actually that's a really good point, because I think a lot of times, you think of they're an event donor and that's all that they are, is an event donor. And how do you take event donors and how do you convert those event donors into, regular donors or people who are more advocates for your organization? And, you're right, we probably could talk about this all day, but I think first and foremost, like you said, if somebody attends something, they should go into your database. Absolutely. They should be tagged accordingly, right? Because you don't want to start inundating them with things, because I think we all know what that feels like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, that's another topic I think we could go over is planning accordingly so that you're not hitting people, a million times. We're in the process of that with one of our audiences right now. It's just like all of a sudden we have a lot of stuff that we need to communicate with them, and I want to make sure that we're not over inundating them to the point that they ignore what they're seeing from us. So that's another topic, and we could go on, but yeah, having a solid plan for that, I think, is key.
All right, we have one more question and then we're gonna wrap things up because our hour has definitely gone very quickly. What are some marketing options that nonprofits could use to re-engage donors who may not have been active in 2020 due to COVID?
Ooh, that is a great question. I mean, I think I already kind of said that we're not typically big event marketers. We have events, but I do think that after all of this isolation, people are probably craving some in-person opportunities. So I would say that finding, relevant ways to maybe bring them in person when it's time, when it's time to do that, I think would be key. But then I think just honestly, if people have been donors, but they weren't for this past year, I'm sure it was for a reason. So I think just consistently messaging to them so that when they are ready, that you're top of mind is what's going to be key. Because if it's because, it's been a rough year financially because of COVID, hopefully that will, subside for them. And eventually they'll be back to, having you as part of their annual giving plan. So just kind of that consistent, but thoughtful messaging, knowing kind of what's going on right now. Again, just to keep top of mind.
And I think you're right. I mean, I think there are a lot of people who have great philanthropic intent, but for various reasons were either conservative in their giving, or just they may have been dealing with family illness. They may have been dealing with, kids learning from home, and there could be a whole bunch of things. And so, take those things into consideration. I think an empathy is a really good way to go about all of your communications, especially right now, is just empathy and understanding. But at the same time, stay true to your mission and to who you are as an organization.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, in a couple minutes. So what are some of your final thoughts and recommendations that you might give as we wrap everything up?
Oh, well, it probably sounds boring in a creative field, but I think you probably are going to know where I'm coming from. But, plan your work, work your plan. That's something we say around our office, our organization a lot. I mean, it's not necessarily, having the most creative idea or the most beautiful design if you're not hitting people in the right place at the right time and at the, outlet that they want. What's the point? So work your plan your work, work your plan. That'll be my final statement.
Awesome. Well, Tracy, we are so glad that you joined us today. This was such a great session, and I hope anyone who's attended the webinar today has been able to get a lot out of this. It's marketing has been, I think, a challenge for a lot of people during COVID. Anytime you're creating a message around complete uncertainty, that's always a challenge. And hopefully that, as we're starting to come out of COVID and got the great news that everyone in Ohio who wants a vaccine should be able to sign up for one by the end of the month. So
I've never been more excited to get a shot.
I said the same thing, right? I said the same thing. So that's great news. So thank you. We appreciate you being with us today, and we, are grateful for your time. So, as we wrap everything up today, I want to just share quickly some of our upcoming webinars for .org. Tuesday, April 20th, we're going to talk about now's the time to rethink your nonprofit marketing. So we're going to take our conversation today about aligning that marketing, and we're going to talk about information really about what are some marketing trends right now. How did COVID change how we are marketing, how we're thinking about marketing, the platforms that we're marketing on, and how people are receiving information. So we're going to be talking about that more in depth. So it's going to be a little bit more of a technical, maybe more of a technical type of thing that we did today. And then watch for our Q2 series. It's going to be coming up, and we'll focus on driving traffic to your nonprofit through content marketing. And all those sessions will be available on our website in the coming weeks at .orgsolutions.com. And you can go ahead and link to those sessions. So if you would like to contact either Tracy or me, here are our contact information, and feel free to email either of us if you have any questions. So again, thank you everyone for attending today. Best to all of you in the coming months as you are putting together and working your plans, and have a great afternoon. Thank you.